primarily on orienting everybody to the financial benchmarking tool. We're really going to take some time to really walk everybody through that process. A couple things before we get started. I just want to one more time just kind of apologize to folks for what happened with the Basecamp, the Basecamp situation last week. We have turned off Basecamp for now. We may be able to figure out how to get it back on in the future in a way that doesn't cause mass reply all emails to get sent to everybody around the state. We do very much apologize for that. We were hoping it was going to be a really useful tool, but at this point it just doesn't make sense. And as a frequent receiver of those kinds of emails, I don't like getting them anymore than anybody else does. So we do apologize for that. So today we're going to take a couple minutes and just kind of recap what happened on the last webinar and the action steps that came out of that webinar. The primary focus of the webinars today is going to be to introduce the benchmarking tool, and Chris Copeland from ICL is going to really walk us through the details of the benchmarking tool. The next piece we're going to focus on is using how to use the quick analysis tool. We're going to define some of the terms in that, and then walk through how the variables interact as part of the quick analysis tool, number of staff, productivity, pair mix, those kinds of things. And so by the end of this webinar, you really should be able to use the quick analysis tool to start to look at some of the issues going on in your own clinic and some of the financial pieces of your own clinic. And then at the very end, we'll wrap up and talk a little bit about kind of what the action steps are going into the next webinar, and talk a little bit about some of those things that kind of get you guys ready to kind of move on to the next step. But really, the primary focus today is going to be talking about specifically about the benchmarking tool, as well as hopefully by the end, everybody will be ready to use the quick analysis tool. So that's our goal and our focus for today.
Hi, everyone, and just a reminder that if you have questions regarding technical problems, to please chat Jessica Ratho, and if you have questions specifically related to the content, to please chat Justine Lay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Ashley. So what we asked folks to do at the end of the last webinar was to go and download the benchmarking tool. So hopefully everybody on the webinar today has downloaded the benchmarking tool. If you downloaded it early in the week, we asked that you go back and in the introductory email for the webinar today, we asked folks to go back and download it again. There were a couple little changes that we wanted to make, and so we made those changes. But the version up there now is the version that we'll be using throughout the project. So if you downloaded it right after it came out, please feel free to go back and download it again. But everybody at this point should have downloaded and kind of gone through the benchmarking tool just to kind of see what's in it. Just as a point of information, the last web-based session is now available. On ctacny.com for anyone who missed it. So if you're part of the webinar and you weren't able to come 2 weeks ago, please feel free to go on our website, download it, and listen to it. We strongly encourage, and as we all know, there are going to be times where every single one of us is going to be unable to participate in one of these things. So we do strongly encourage folks, and we do make available all the previous webinars on our website, and we strongly encourage folks to go and look at those webinars and really review them and catch up, because we really kind of think it's the entirety of the process, which is going to be helpful. If you've not signed up for the listserv, please do so. There's no need to sign up for Basecamp right now because we have kind of shut down the service for the moment. And if we decide to bring it back online, we'll ask folks to sign up again. Okay? All right. So before we get started with the benchmarking tool yet, we'd just like to ask a couple polling questions. The first polling question is, have you reviewed the benchmarking tool yet? And Ashley is going to activate the benchmarking tool, or the polling question, sorry. So you see it on the right side of your screen. So please answer yes or no, and then once we have a bit of a critical mass, we'll turn it off and get the results. Okay, so Ashley's going to show us the results for that. The results should be up in just a moment. There we go. So 59% said they had 59% said they had reviewed the benchmarking tool. 19 folks said they hadn't reviewed it yet. And luckily, no one said they hadn't heard of the benchmarking tool. So we're very excited about that part. So folks, at least we've gotten the message out there that it's out there, and it looks like most folks have reviewed it at this point. So that's really good to hear. Our next polling question, we'd just like to get a sense. We've heard from some folks that they're logging in as their core implementation team, which we think is fantastic. So we'd just like to get a sense from folks if you're either logging in by yourself, logging in with up to 4 other people, or logging in with more than 5 people. And Ashley is going to activate that polling question now, and we'll give folks about 30 seconds or so to answer it. So if you could just please answer if you're logging alone as part or with other people, and then kind of what group of people did you log in as. Okay. So we're launching, the poll has ended, and we're going to have the results in just a second. We should have the results momentarily. No, not yet. Yes.
Okay, so we have the results from the poll. So 56% of people are logged in by themselves, 25% are with up to 4 other people, and 1% answered that they are with more than 5 people.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And at this point, we are going to turn this over to Chris Copeland. So Chris, could you unmute your line?
I have done that.
Okay. I am not seeing you listed as on the list of presenters at the moment, so I'm a little concerned about that, but I can pass it to Justine if she can.
Yeah, we're just moving positions here.
Okay, so I'm going to pass the baton to Justine, and we'll use her computer. Justine, does that work? Okay. Yep. Okay, so Justine, I'm making you the presenter for now.
Okay, so good afternoon.
Oh, you know what? Wait, Chris, before we do that, I'm going to take it back really quickly. If you could, yep. Justine, if you could pass it back to me, and I'll do those 2 slides for you, Chris. Sorry about that.
It's still on you, Andy.
Okay.
So I carry on? Okay, so let me introduce myself. I'm Chris Copeland. I'm the Chief Program Officer for ICL, and I think the important point in terms of this presentation is the LCSW piece. I'm a social worker. I've been a social worker for many years, and I've been doing this work for 30+ years. But I'm also a social worker who's grown to love numbers and spreadsheets and understanding the finances behind how to make clinics work. And the reason why we chose to have me introduce this, the benchmarking tool, is to try to make sure that all those non-financial folks on the line understand that this is something that can be used, should be used by social workers, clinic directors, etc. And my remit, my instructions were to make numbers exciting. So that's what I'm going to try and do. So if you want to go to the next slide, Andy.
You're on the benchmarking tool slide.
I can't see it. Which one? The financial benchmarking tool slide?
Yes.
Okay, so what I'm going to try to do with the benchmarking tool is show you how the different types of services that we provide affect the bottom line. So how the payer mix works, the indirect versus direct. The benchmarking tool will allow you to look at reimbursement and see whether it meets your expected costs. You'll be able to project forward how different changes will affect the bottom line. And really importantly, it'll enable you to develop staffing and fiscal plan based on your current and service mix. Basically, what it does is enables you to look at what you're doing and project out what different changes you can make to make a clinic break even, make money, understand why you're losing money, etc. If you're anything like the clinic, the position that we're in at ICL, trying to make our clinics break even. And then if you can go to the quick analysis tool, Andy, slide. Oh, you are there, okay. One of the things I think that we learned from the first initiative, the CTAC initiative, was that the benchmarking tool is an incredibly sophisticated tool, but it can be a little bit off-putting to first-timers into this. So what we came up with was what we call in a quick analysis tool. It's a sandbox. It's a play area where you can change the different variables within that are important to a clinic and see how they affect your bottom line. This is somewhere where it's a tool that gives you immediate feedback to see where how the bottom line is. It's something you can do in an approximate way. You don't need detailed information from HR and billing, etc., to make the quick analysis tool work. It's somewhere where both clinic directors, clinicians, finance folks, billing folks can come together and agree on how to make a clinic break even. And I'm going to show you how some of these things interact. The full benchmarking tool is where you do the rigorous work to make sure the quick analysis tool is actually giving you the results that you need. But this is a very quick feedback tool that I've come to use in many different programs as a social worker, as a clinician, to explain to non-financial people how a clinic and what the various variables, how the various variables interact. And you don't need a huge understanding of Excel, although you do need to know how to use Excel. So what I'm going to do is just turn to that quick analysis tool now and show you the various elements and how it interacts. And basically, I'm going to explain the different variables and also play with it in real time so you can see what goes on. So here we go. The whole benchmarking tool consists of these various tabs, which have a lot of detailed, exact information that you can put into here. And over the next few weeks, the next few webinars, we'll be going through each of these tabs around employee direct care costs, fee-for-service direct costs, indirect care, how the model works in detail. We'll be going through each of these tabs in detail over the next few weeks. But I wanted to jump here to the Quick Analysis Tool tab. And those of you who have already downloaded the benchmark may have started playing with this. So the Quick Analysis Tool isn't connected to any of the other tabs within the benchmarking tool, unlike the Model Analysis tab, which which produces results by inputting information into the other tabs. This one stands alone. This is where you can input different variables. This is where you can figure out what will work without fear of breaking the whole tool, which is, I think, often a fear.
All right, so Chris, just to be clear, Chris, this is Andy. Just to be clear, you can play with this tool, but it's not connected. It won't mess up any of the data you put into any of the other tabs.
Exactly, exactly. So this is where Exactly. So this is where you can put in crazy models to see how they work without worrying about any of the background information. But it's a place where I've always thought that. So if I change the direct care staff to completely fee-for-service, how will it work? What will it look like? And this is the place you can do that. I want you to keep right. So the place to keep your eye on as I'm using this tool is this cell here. This is the bottom line for the clinic. The green numbers are obviously surpluses, and as I play with this, some of these numbers are going to turn red as we go into losses. But this is essentially the place where all these different cells feed into. So I'm going to go through them and talk about them. But essentially we have 3 or 4 different areas. Here is where the revenue is input, and this is based on the revenue per CPT code and the different payer mix that you may have. This area is where you can input different facts about your clinic, whether you work a 40-hour work week, how much you're paying fee-for-service staff, productivity standards, etc. Here is where we begin to see how the number of staff that you may have in the clinic, and all these numbers you can change, translate into units per staff, the amount of revenue they may generate, and the approximate cost that these staff, the approximate cost for these staff. This all works out to the revenue adding up, the costs adding up, and the bottom line is generated from there. So basically this allows you to see how, if you change revenue, change the amount of hours that people work in, change the productivity standards, how that ripples through the whole model and ends up at the bottom line. I'll just give you a very quick demonstration of that. This model is based on staff working a 40-hour work week. If you work in a clinic where your work week is 35 hours, you'll immediately see the ripple through this in terms of the total units being produced and a hit to the bottom line. Okay, I'm just going to turn that back to 40 hours because it makes me feel more comfortable having a little surplus there. So I'll start off with the revenue. This revenue is inputted for the upstate revenue per CPT code. So this is the equivalent of the payment per hour. And what this enables you to do is look at the revenue in your clinic and understand how the different payer mixes work. For this clinic, we're looking at 59% Medicaid and Medicaid managed care. Andy, yeah?
Yeah, so I just want to highlight one thing. So when we talk about revenue per CPT for this particular way, the way we've done this, what we're talking about is rolling up what could be a number of services into the equivalent of an hour of time, correct?
Correct. So this is the revenue that is created for an hour of service. That could be 2 half-hour services. It could be a CPT code for a 45-minute service. But it's the revenue per hour equivalent to the CPT. And if that is a complicated concept at the moment, it's certainly one of the webinars that we'll be conducting over the next few weeks as to how to understand CPT codes exactly.
Right. Thank you.
Okay. So this allows, and this is information you should be able to get from your finance department. It's exactly the amount of revenue per different payer sources. It also allows you to look at the amount of free care that you may be providing in the clinic. We're all mission-driven, and providing services to people who don't have any income source whatsoever is very important. So this is a figure we've got to pay attention to. The no payment here, this line here, is a very important figure because that's the amount of money that you may be losing through not being able to collect on services provided. So this may be the fact that we had unsigned treatment plans. It may be the fact that we're getting denials from insurance companies for reasons that we've gone beyond the number of services allowed. This is a very important number because it's something that we can we can do something about. We can begin seeing how increasing or decreasing the denials from the backroom functions become really important in making a clinic break even. Again, if we look at changing this to a 5% rate, and maybe that's because we had 21%, does that add up to, that adds up to 100. So maybe we were actually losing 5% of our third-party insurance, and we're running at a loss in the clinic. So this gives an idea to this enables you as a clinic to see how much of the revenue you're keeping on the back end and how important that is to making sure that a clinic can break even. I'm just going to move that back to where it was before. Okay. So these numbers are numbers that you can input based on your own clinic. A downstate clinic would have revenue here of, I think the revenue is around $150 per CPT code, but the indirect care over here ends up being a lot higher because of the cost of doing business in the city. So that's the revenue, and it's important to understand in detail how the percentage of different payer mixes affects your bottom line. It is something that you can think about doing something about. I've worked in other states where Medicare was a payer source that some clinics stopped accepting. They stopped accepting it because they couldn't afford to provide services at the reimbursement rate. So you would see the number of people who had Medicaid increase and the number of people who had Medicare decrease, and it would have an effect on the average revenue per CPT code. The average revenue would go up, and you'd see that trickle down through this model and increase the bottom line. I'm going to move over here now and look at some of these elements here. Some of these are fairly obvious. The hours per week.
Before you get started, can I just highlight a couple things that jump out at me? I think one of the things that this really highlights, where folks are going to really work closely between the clinic staff as well as the finance staff, is really to nail down the revenue that they're bringing in per unit, but also to really nail down what your payer mix is. What is the percentage of Medicaid, straight Medicaid, managed Medicaid, third-party expenses, and to really figure that out for each of your clinics, because that's going to be very important in terms of being able to play with these kinds of things. So I think as we talk about things that jump out or things that are action steps, one of the things that folks are going to want to do is to figure out those kinds of numbers on the front end. And on the revenue per CPT, some of that will be helped through the benchmarking tool. But in terms of your payer mix, that's just going to be something that folks are going to have to kind of figure out.
Yeah, and it's one of those incredibly important details that as a clinic director, one can't leave to the finance and billing department. It is something that as a clinic director, one needs to understand who's coming through the door, the amount of people coming through the door with different payer sources, and how that affects the bottom line. So yes, you're right. It's a critically important detail to understand, and the sooner the better. So in terms of the input data here, we have hours per week, which is obvious. This is the hours that the clinic, that staff work in the clinic. This is the rate that you're paying fee-for-service staff. This is I'm going to jump over a couple here. We have here the available weeks per year for the psychiatrists. This is 52 weeks if you have psychiatrists working every week of the year. Maybe like us, you have psychiatrists. We have a number of psychiatrists completing services within a clinic every week of the year. So this is actually 52 weeks of the year, but you may not have that. You may have psychiatrists working 46 weeks of the year, 48 weeks of the year, whatever. But that allows you to put in here approximately how many weeks of the year you have psychiatric time. And if you look here, I'm going to, where are we? The revenue here from the psychiatrist line I'm covering. So if we decrease the number of hours, number of weeks that the psychiatrist works in a year, we see the revenue decrease and it hits the bottom line again. An important element to keep it to understand. Also, how much time does the psychiatrist spend doing non-billable time? It's quite often quite likely that the psychiatrist spends time in clinical rounds, maybe in administrative time. So again, paying attention to the percentage of time psychiatrists are not being productive, but are being in other non-reimbursable productive services. Other revenue for the year is important within the clinic. And one of the big numbers, the big debate numbers, is this one at the top, the 58% of billable hours. And this may be the number that we spend more time answering questions around. What is a reasonable billable hour target for our clinics? And the answer is going to be in a question, which is whatever's good for your clinic. But let me show you what I've got here. I've got 58% of billable hours to paid hours. What that means is, I'm just going to do a little calculation at the side, is, oops, I didn't need to do that, excuse me. I'm going to do a little calculation at the side. That means that if we have a 40-hour work week times a 52 work week, the potential hours that somebody, the hours that somebody is paid for is 2,080. If we think about the 2,080 times 58%, we end up with 1,206 hours that somebody is available to do billable services, which is magically the number here in this cell here, which is in effect the number of hours in a year that somebody can be providing direct billable service. That gives you the annual number. What you can do, and what we discuss internally at our agency, and you need to discuss in yours, is how many hours a week does that work out to be? I figure that people are at work about 46 weeks of the year, after they take vacation, after they take holidays, and that brings us to 26 hours of reimbursable services a week. Now, that's going to vary between clinics. It's going to vary depending on your reimbursement. It's going to depend on your what your tradition is in terms of the number of hours. But that's how those are the numbers in terms of the annual expected billable hours, and also the hours per week if somebody's there for a 40-hour work week, how many hours in any one week they may produce. That's based on this being 50%. Yes, Andy.
Chris, can you play with change the hours to 35, the hours per week, and show what that does to this calculation? Because my sense is that's going to drastically change this whole thing, right?
So if you're only there at 35 hours, okay.
So then if you're only there 35 hours, then you either need to change the, so if you need to hit the same revenue targets, but folks are only there 35, then you have to change the percentage of billable hours to paid hours significantly up to hit the same revenue targets.
Yeah, or you have to cut the overhead, or increase staff, etc. Yes, but highlighting that shows how changing the variables within this ripple through the equation. So if I move that back to 40 hours, what this tool is showing you at 58% ratio of paid hours, billable hours to paid hours, would mean that somebody would need an annual target of 1,206 hours, and in any one week where they were there for 40 hours, they would need to do 26 hours of billable service. Now, when we look over here, we can see that we have 5.55 FTEs each producing the 1,206 units per year, which gives us an annual total of 6,696 units. They cost each around $50,000, and this is a very approximate number This is the cost of somebody's salary plus their indirect cost, their health benefits, etc., etc. So then we have, what this shows here is that we have a cost, which is these 5 people times their cost, and we have the revenue, which is the total units times this average revenue for CPT. So we can see
Chris,
that...
is there any way, we had a request from folks, if there was any way you could make the, the zoom in a little bit more.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Good point. I didn't realize.
On the bottom right-hand corner, you can do that. That works.
I can do it simply, can't I? Yeah. There we go. All right.
There we go. Probably a little smaller because that works too.
Okay. That work?
Perfect.
Let me just So what this line does is calculate the cost, which is the cost per direct care staff times the number of staff we have. It calculates the revenue, which is the total units multiplied by the average CPT. So this is the place where you can say, well, maybe I need, what happens if I have, instead of 5.5 staff, I have 7 staff? Simply replace the 5.5 by 7, and you immediately see you generate more units, the cost goes up, the revenue goes up, and the bottom line increases dramatically. If I go backwards 1 step, those 1.5 staff, you can immediately see generating a revenue surplus that goes from 4,000 to 114,000. So 1.5 staff being fully productive gives you an increase in revenue on the bottom line of around $100,000. Okay. So the next line down talks about fee-for-service staff. And if your clinic is anything like mine, then your clinic is probably made up of salaried staff and fee-for-service staff.
Can you expand the B column for revenue at the bottom?
Oh, okay, sorry. I'm just been pointed out that this column here isn't showing up very well. Why won't it do it? Won't do it. Yeah, right. So we're looking at the fee-for-service line. Sorry, we're trying to do 2 things at once. It won't do it. Okay, I'm just going to shrink it down a tad. See if that works. There we go. Okay. So the fee-for-service line does the same thing, but for salaries for the fee-for-service staff. We've got 2.5 staff here. If we look at this cell here, what we've got is we've got a 40-hour work week times 52 weeks times 0.8. Now, what does that 0.8 mean? That 0.8 means that for every hour that we're paying a fee-for-service staff, we're receiving 1 CPT visit from them. So we're in fact getting, in this model, only 3/4 of an hour of service for paying fee-for-service staff for an hour's worth of work. I was talking to David beforehand, and what we're doing at ICL in our clinics is adding up all the hours of work, CPTs that somebody provides as a fee-for-service, and paying them an hour for each hour that they do. So in our model, that ratio would be 1. So for every hour's worth of work that somebody does, we will pay them the hourly rate of $45. So that means if somebody does 2 half-hour CPT codes, that adds up to 1 hour. We get revenue for 1 hour. We pay them for 1 hour. Does that make sense? I know you can't.
Yeah, it does.
I can ask Andy whether that makes sense.
Actually,
Chris, could you run?
You would pay them for 2 half hours, actually.
Say that again, Scott?
The half hour. The payment system is weighted, So we would actually pay them for 2 half hours. We have to actually keep track of 15-minute sessions, half hour, 45, and hour sessions because they're all weighted based on the CPT weight.
Right. So again, that's maybe too much detail for today, and we'll get back to that as we go forward. But essentially, the weighted CPT codes, rolling them up to a total, and then paying people for the an equivalent hourly rate for that.
Chris, it's Andy real quick. Could you raise up the third-party billing so it's a much greater percentage of the overall revenue?
Third-party billing. So you're saying maybe that instead of that we get 30%.
Make that 50%, or make it a little bit bigger. There we go. And then rate, because one of the things that now we have 127%. So you just need to reduce the other ones to get down to 100.
If you do 50% third party, then maybe you're only doing 18% Medicaid managed care, and you're only doing 14% Medicaid. Whoa, I got it.
There we go. So one, you see here that it really, it brings you from it brings you from being in the green to the red. But the other piece, Chris, if you could just show folks how, if even by increasing volume, it's still going to make the problem worse and not better. Because I think one of the problems that folks have run into as we've done the BEEP thing, they start noticing when they look at their model, is if their revenue is actually less than their cost per unit, by increasing volume or increasing staff, it still doesn't make it any better. So I just would like to model that out so people can get a sense of what that ends up looking like.
So what we're doing in this model is having a payer mix that is weighted so heavily to a poor reimbursement rate that if we increase the number of staff that we had, therefore increasing the volume, we're still not getting to where we need to be in terms of breaking even. And you begin to question whether there is enough census to support that many staff. So if we were again back down to, whoops, sorry, wrong place. If we were again at 5.5 staff, 2.5, there we go. So this is back to where we were. So it's very difficult with that level, that payer mix, to see how you would begin to break even. The number of staff that you would need to bring on board and the increase in census probably goes way beyond what is available. So in a circumstance like this, I think this is what Andy's getting at, really the only place to begin this, to bring this back in line, is to look at the payer mix. So I think this was around 35% maybe. So if we again said, well, in case, what we've got to do is really start focusing on bringing people with Medicaid through the door, and I'll just bring these numbers back up to 22% maybe, back up to 100%, we're getting close back to break even again. So the remedy for an awful payer mix may not be more volume, more staff. It may need to be attacked through changing the payer mix. And these are the things you can play with to see how you can make the clinic viable. It may be that what you'd want to do is increase the fee-for-service instead of increasing the direct care staff. So maybe what I'd want to do is have less salaried staff, but I'd want to bring up the number of fee-for-service and see what that did. What did it do? Did it help us out? It brought down the deficit. You can see how that changes. I decreased the number of direct care staff, I increased the number of consultants, and the bottom line changes dramatically as you do that. This gives you the ability just to do that, figure out what it is you need to do to make the clinic break even. The indirect care.
And I think the other takeaway from this is that it's a multitude of interactions. It's not just one thing that really projects where you end up.
Yeah. Yeah, so, in a clinic in a case like this where you're $14,000 astray, one of the places that you can do is say, well, maybe we need to cut back on our indirect costs and get back into break even. And that cut back on the indirect costs could have been, well, we can't afford as many front desk staff. We need to think about the number of supervisors we have, the amount of time that the program director is not engaged in direct care. Whatever that might be, the indirect care costs, and again, indirect care costs are something that we'll do in much more detail later on, are something that you can play with as well to make sure you get down here to the green number. So the other element to point out here, which is critically important, is the number of units, number of visits that a psychiatrist is doing per hour. This is a slightly complicated concept. For every time a psychiatrist sees someone, we get a 0.66 weighted CPT. So if somebody sees two people in an hour, we're going to end up with not an hour's worth of reimbursement, but 1.2 hours worth of reimbursement. This is a number that we work with our psychiatrists very regularly on, in terms of how many people an hour does somebody see. If the psychiatrist is seeing 2 people an hour, I hope you're following this, times 0.66, which is the weighted CPT, we end up with, this is formatted wrong, sorry. We end up with roughly 1.2 units. If somebody's seeing 3 people an hour, then the number of units we would get is 3.3 times 0.66, which is about 1.9, I would guess. And we can look again, as I change that, what the revenue here will be for the psychiatrist as we go from 2 visits an hour to 3 visits an hour. The revenue jumps up very dramatically. So this is a very important element to pay attention to, because obviously psychiatrists are incredibly high cost to the clinic, and productivity from the psychiatrist is absolutely critical to the financial stability of the agency. Again, I'll just point out, moving from 2 visits on average per hour by a psychiatrist to 3 visits on average for the psychiatrist changes the bottom line from $141,000 to $23,000 surplus. There's nearly $100,000 surplus a year in that shift from 2 to 3 visits per hour for a psychiatrist. What time is it? We're now at around 1:45. So these are all the elements within this tool. As I say, you can play with any of these without fear of breaking them. Understanding each of these elements is critical to the success of your clinic. Not understanding how many hours clinicians are providing, not understanding the payer mix, not understanding the cost of indirect costs, all of which should be available to the clinics directly. Not understanding any of those would mean that you're not understanding one of the critical factors for making a clinic successful. And as you can see, I think, from this very quick play with the tool, all of these elements interact with each other, and all of these elements can be changed to affect the bottom line. Andy, did you have any questions, comments about that?
I think that's great. I mean, I think the couple takeaways that I always get out of this, and also in talking to folks, is that it isn't one thing, and I think this kind of tool can be really helpful in moving the different pieces around so you can figure out what model is going to work best for your own individual clinic. Because some of it's on the payer mix side, some of it's on the staffing mix side, some of it ends up being, in terms of, I think the piece, and I was actually just on the phone with an agency director the other day talking about the psychiatrist piece. And ways of pushing up the number of visits for the psychiatrist do for each agency, because for that particular clinic, they're really a loss leader, and so that those pieces are all, and they all interact with one another. So I think it's really key to be able to think about your clinic as this kind of group of factors that interact, as opposed to one thing, just push more productivity or whatever it happens to be.
Right. I mean, one of the this break-even picture that we have here is based on 100%, all these 5.5 staff hitting this productivity standard every week that they're at work. Now, that is a huge task for any clinic to manage, and it's worth understanding using a tool like this what happens if you don't hit those targets every week. So let me just change this 58 to 55%. And you can see on this number on the end here, it's changed it from just over 26 to nearly 25. So moving that moving from 58 to 55% means that on average your staff are not doing 26, which is what we would ask in this clinic. They're doing almost 25. That's a very high standard of productivity. It's around, you know, you're at 95% productivity. I want 26. You give me 25. Pat on the back. That's really good. The problem is that the clinic's losing money. So this is important to understand, that a very small reduction in productivity for staff. This is really only an hour less productivity a week than we will be expecting. I'll move this back to 58%, and we're now making money with a small margin. It means that the clinic could lose money. I think that, for me, that's a very important point, because it can feel to individual clinicians that almost hitting their target's good enough. But you're not working with one clinician who didn't hit their target for 1 week. You're dealing with 5 who didn't hit their target every week for 46 weeks of the year, which builds up to a big loss in productivity and a very serious hit to the bottom line. So again, I mean, I've used this sort of tool to show individual clinicians within a clinic the impact of the lack of productivity. And the productivity number that this model is based on, and it can be different from each clinic, but this isn't a target. That 26 a week isn't a target. The 1,206 isn't a target. It's a minimum.
Right.
To break even,
right.
This is a minimum that people need to achieve. And that may be a shift in thinking from I'm trying to get to 26 to 26 is what I have to do. It's the minimum.
Absolutely. So I think it might make sense at this point to move on to the 2 polling questions that we have. And Chris, if you want to pass it back to me, and I'll walk folks through that.
Yes, we will do that in a second.
Okay, Ashley did it, so I'm now should be the presenter. Can you see my phone? Okay. So Chris has really done a great job, I hope, walking us through the analysis tool. So we have two polling questions to do before we kind of wrap up for the day. Do you think your core implementation team has the information they need to use the quick analysis tool? Yes, no, or not sure. So based on today's webinar, do you think you got what you needed to start to be able to play with this a little bit? And also, do you have the information from your agency to be able to do that? So you could just answer, and we'll leave it up for a couple seconds, and then we'll wrap it up.
Okay, so I'm going to show the polling results. And you should be able to see them. And as you can see, the majority of people said yes, the 5% said no, and a few of you guys did not answer. So we're going to move on.
Great. So our next polling question is, do you think you will immediately try to use this tool? So yes, no, or not sure. So Ashley's going to activate that poll right now, and we'll leave it up for a couple seconds, and then we will we'll report out the results.
way to close it.
So Ash is closing the polling question now, and we should see the results in just a minute. And so apparently it takes, one of the things we're learning about the WebEx system is it takes 20 seconds to close the poll and analyze the data. I think there's a chipmunk somewhere back there plugging all the data into a spreadsheet for it. Okay, so what we see here is that about a little more than 50% said yes, they were going to begin to use it immediately. 3% said no, and some folks weren't sure. So it's really great to see that we have a little more than half of folks are ready to use this immediately. That's really wonderful. So with that, we're going to transition and kind of wrap up kind of what our expectations are going into the next thing. So before the next webinar, our hope is really that everybody will review the benchmarking tool with their core team, play around a little bit with the quick analysis tool, develop and send any questions you have to CTAC that can be answered in the office hours. So as we did last week, and we had a bunch of folks on last week for the office hours, as we did last week, we'll be doing, just to remind you, that we'll be doing after every one of these, the alternating Friday. So next Friday between 12 and 1, we'll have an office hours. So as you guys start playing with the benchmarking tool and the quick analysis tool, please send us your questions, and you can submit those via the Qualtrics survey, which we're going to send out to you, or the link is here. You can submit those questions, and then we will. You guys already have the link, so you can just submit the same link every week. You can submit your questions to the office hours. It'll allow us to get organized and be ready to present those. The other piece that we want you to do before the next webinar in 2 weeks is to review the indirect cost section of the benchmarking tool, because our next web-based training will really focus on indirect costs. So you're going to want to talk about what the costs are in your agencies that are indirect costs and kind of start to get a sense of that, so that when we're starting to go through it on the webinar in 2 weeks, you'll be able to really kind of have a thought in your head of kind of what those costs that are going to be associated from your agency are. So again, the two things are, first, kind of start to play with the quick analysis tool. Hopefully it'll be helpful for you folks. As you come into questions, feel free to send them to us via the Qualtrics survey. If you want those questions answered, come on the office hours next week between 12 and 1, and we'll answer all the questions that we get. And then start to look at the indirect cost section of the webinar. So a couple just kind of housekeeping things. The office hours is next week, the 22nd on Friday from 12 to 1. We'll always do all of these at the same time from 12 to 1 on Friday afternoons. Module 3 on indirect costs will be on the 1st of March from 12 to 1, and the office hours for that will be on the 8th of March from 12 to 1. And then just to highlight, you guys have already gotten the registration. The slide's a little outdated because it says registration coming soon, but you've already gotten the registration email for these. These are our MTM business webinars that we're going to do a webinar starting next Thursday on open access, followed by a webinar on the 4th on collaborative documentation, followed by a webinar on the 14th on centralized scheduling. The announcement for signing up for all of those have already gone out, so if you go back through your email and get that, we'll send out several reminders to sign up, but we really are trying to get as many people involved in that as possible, because we really think that those webinars are going to be very helpful in terms of the implementation side of things and kind of what do you do once you know where you're at in terms of your financial benchmarks. So again, here is the link to Qualtrics to survey. If you have questions, please reach out to Justine. Her email is here, and you guys should already have Justine's email. And again, once we're recording today's webinar, we will upload it onto the CTAC NY website sometime early next week, and you'll be able to download it, or if you have staff, not download it, but you'll be able to view it. And if you have staff who weren't able to come today and you want to make sure get to see this, it'll be available, and they can look at it online, and it stays up there indefinitely. Okay? So thank you very much for coming. Please fill out the survey afterwards. We're very interested in your feedback. You know, this is, as we've said at the beginning of this project, this is our introductory way of doing BEAM this way, and so we really want as much feedback as possible so we can make changes along the way. So thanks again for joining today, and we hope everybody has a very nice long weekend, and we will look forward to speaking with many of you next week at the office hours, and all of you again in 2 weeks for the indirect costs webinar. Thank you very much, and again, have a nice weekend. Take care, everybody.